The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace gleamed under crystal chandeliers as President Donald Trump adjusted his red tie one final time. It was his first state visit to Britain, and everything had to be perfect. The Queen herself would be hosting. Him and millions of eyes around the world would be watching every moment. Trump had always been fascinated by power and ceremony. The idea of meeting the Queen excited him more than he cared to admit. He had spent weeks preparing, studying royal protocol with his advisors, though he secretly believed his natural charisma would carry him through any awkward moments. As his motorcade approached the palace gates, Trump noticed something that immediately caught his attention. The royal guards stood motionless in their iconic red uniforms and tall black hats, looking like living statues. Their discipline was remarkable, but Trump found their silence almost insulting. Here he was, the President of the United States, and these guards acted as if he were invisible. "Look at them," Trump muttered to his chief of staff, who sat beside him in the armored limousine. "They don't even acknowledge us. In America, our military shows proper respect to their commander-in-chief." His aide shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, that's actually their job. The Queen's Guard are trained to remain completely still and silent during their duties. It's a centuries-old tradition." Trump waved dismissively. "Traditions can change. Everything can be improved with the right approach." The palace staff had prepared meticulously for this visit. They knew Trump's reputation for being unpredictable and sometimes difficult. Special briefings had been given to everyone who would interact with the American president, from the highest-ranking officials to the kitchen staff. Captain James Mitchell, head of the Queen's Guard detail for the visit, had reviewed the security arrangements dozens of times. He was a decorated military officer with 15 years of service, and he took his responsibilities seriously. The Queen's safety and the smooth execution of state ceremonies were his top priorities. When Trump's limousine finally stopped at the palace entrance, the president stepped out with his characteristic confidence. He surveyed the scene like a general inspecting troops, his eyes lingering on the guards positioned around the courtyard. Their stillness seemed to challenge him somehow, as if they were deliberately showing him disrespect. The Queen appeared at the top of the palace steps, radiant in a powder blue coat and matching hat. Her smile was warm but formal, exactly as protocol demanded. Trump's irritation with the guards momentarily faded as he focused on the historic meeting ahead. But as they walked through the receiving line, Trump couldn't help but notice how the guards remained perfectly still, not even a glance in his direction. In his mind, this wasn't just tradition, it was a slight against his position and his country. During the initial pleasantries with the Queen, Trump's thoughts kept drifting back to those motionless figures. He had built his career on commanding attention and respect. The idea that anyone, even ceremonial guards, would ignore his presence bothered him more than he expected. The Queen, with her decades of experience dealing with world leaders, sensed something was troubling her guest. She had met 12 American presidents before Trump, and each had brought their own personality and quirks to their visits. She had learned to read the subtle signs of discomfort or displeasure. "I do hope you find our ceremonial traditions interesting, Mr. President," she said gently as they moved toward the state dining room. "Our guards take great pride in maintaining standards that have remained unchanged for generations." Trump nodded politely, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Very impressive, Your Majesty, though I've always believed that even the best traditions can benefit from fresh thinking." The Queen raised an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. In her long reign, she had heard many world leaders suggest changes to British customs, usually without understanding their deeper significance. She decided to let the comment pass without response, but she made a mental note to watch how the rest of the visit unfolded. As the day progressed through various ceremonies and photo opportunities, Trump found himself increasingly fixated on the guards. Every time he passed them, their unwavering attention to duty felt more and more like a personal challenge. He began to see their silence not as professionalism, but as arrogance. The state banquet that evening was a masterpiece of royal hospitality. Golden plates reflected the light of massive chandeliers, and the finest wines accompanied courses prepared by the palace's renowned chefs. Trump sat at the Queen's right hand, the position of highest honor for any visiting head of state. Throughout dinner, Trump made charming conversation with the Queen and other distinguished guests. He told stories about his business empire, shared his thoughts on international trade, and even complimented British culture. On the surface, everything appeared to be going smoothly, but Trump's eyes kept wandering to the guards positioned around the dining hall. Even during this grand celebration, they remained like statues, their faces showing no emotion, their eyes focused straight ahead. It was as if the most powerful man in the world was invisible to them. After dinner, as guests mingled in the adjoining reception room, Trump found himself standing near one of the guards. The young soldier looked to be in his 20s, with perfectly polished boots and a uniform that showed not a single wrinkle. Trump studied his face, looking for any sign of acknowledgement or recognition. Nothing. Not even the slightest movement of the eyes. Trump's daughter Ivanka, who was part of the official delegation, noticed her father's preoccupation. She approached him with a gentle smile, hoping to redirect his attention to the important conversations happening around them. "Dad, the British Chancellor wants to discuss the new trade agreement," she whispered quietly. Trump nodded, but didn't move away from the guard. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone nearby. He stepped directly in front of the soldier and extended his hand for a handshake. "Good evening, soldier. You're doing a fine job here." The guard's training kicked in immediately. He didn't acknowledge the gesture, didn't move a muscle, didn't even blink. His eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond Trump's shoulder, as if the President of the United States simply didn't exist. A hush fell over the nearby guests. The Queen, who had been speaking with the Archbishop of Canterbury, noticed the sudden silence and turned to see what was happening. Her expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could detect a slight tension around her eyes. Trump stood there for several long seconds, his hand extended, waiting for a response. That would never come. The silence stretched uncomfortably as other guests pretended not to notice the awkward scene. Finally, Trump lowered his hand, his face showing a mixture of embarrassment and growing anger. "Interesting training methods you have here, Your Majesty," Trump said loudly enough for several people to hear. "Very dedicated soldiers." The Queen moved gracefully toward them, her diplomatic instincts taking over. "Indeed, Mr. President, our guards are trained to maintain their duties regardless of any distractions. It's a discipline that has served us well for centuries." The word distractions stung more than Trump expected. He forced a smile, but inside he was seething. In his world, everyone acknowledged his presence. Senators, CEOs, foreign ministers, they all showed him the respect he believed he deserved. These guards were making him look foolish in front of international dignitaries and media representatives. Later that night, back in his guest quarters, Trump couldn't sleep. He paced around his room, replaying the evening's events. His chief of staff had tried to explain the guards' behavior as simply following protocol, but Trump saw it differently. "It's about respect," he told his aide. "These guards are deliberately ignoring the President of the United States. How does that look to the rest of the world? How does that look to our allies and enemies?" His aide, exhausted from the long day, tried once more to explain royal protocol. "Sir, they treat everyone the same way. Even the Queen herself doesn't get acknowledged when they're on duty. It's not personal." But Trump wasn't listening to reason anymore. In his mind, this had become a matter of national pride and personal dignity. He had been insulted on the world stage, and he wasn't going to let it slide. As he finally tried to settle down for the night, Trump was already formulating a plan. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to interact with the palace staff and the Queen herself. He would find a way to address this situation properly. The Queen, meanwhile, was having her own late-night conversation with her private secretary. They discussed the day's events and the subtle tensions they had observed. She had dealt with difficult guests before, but something about Trump's reaction to the guards concerned her. "Make sure Captain Mitchell knows about the incident," she instructed. "I suspect tomorrow may bring some challenges we haven't anticipated." Morning came with typical London drizzle, but inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Trump had barely touched his breakfast, his mind focused entirely on what he planned to do. Today's schedule included a tour of the palace gardens and a private meeting with the Queen, but Trump had his own agenda. Captain Mitchell started his day with the usual security briefing, but this morning included a special warning from the Queen's private secretary. The American president had shown unusual interest in the guards' behavior, and everyone needed to be prepared for potential disruptions. "Under no circumstances are any of you to break protocol," Mitchell told his men. "I don't care what happens, what anyone says, or what pressure you feel. You maintain your positions and your silence. Is that understood?" The guards nodded solemnly. They had trained for years to handle all kinds of situations, from tourist attempts at conversation to more serious security threats. But dealing with an unpredictable world leader was something new for most of them. Trump's first stop was the palace gardens, where he was scheduled to view the famous rose collection with the Queen. As they walked along the carefully maintained paths, Trump seemed distracted, his eyes constantly scanning for guards positioned around the grounds. "Your security arrangements are quite extensive," Trump observed, stopping near a guard post where a young soldier stood at attention. The Queen followed his gaze. "Security is, of course, essential, but our guards also serve a ceremonial function that our visitors often find fascinating." Trump stepped closer to the guard, a tall young man with piercing blue eyes who couldn't have been more than 25. The soldier's gaze remained fixed straight ahead, showing no awareness of the most powerful man in the free world standing just 3 feet away. "Remarkable discipline," Trump said, but his tone carried an edge that the Queen immediately recognized. Without warning, Trump clapped his hands loudly right in front of the guard's face. The sound echoed across the quiet garden, startling several palace staff members who were discreetly following the tour. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't show any reaction whatsoever. "Extraordinary," Trump said, but now his voice carried clear irritation. "Tell me, Your Majesty, what would it take to get a reaction from one of these men?" The Queen's expression remained serene, but inside she felt a growing concern about where this was heading. "Our guards are trained to ignore all external stimuli while on duty, Mr. President. It's a point of great pride for them and for Britain." Trump circled around the guard like a predator studying its prey. "All external stimuli, even legitimate authority figures, even heads of state?" "Everyone," the Queen replied firmly, "without exception." This answer seemed to fuel Trump's determination rather than discourage it. He stopped directly in front of the guard and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. Clearly, "Soldier, I am Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. I am ordering you to acknowledge my presence." The garden fell silent except for the gentle patter of rain on leaves. Palace staff froze in place, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard. The Queen's face remained diplomatically neutral, but her hands clasped slightly tighter behind her back. The guard continued staring straight ahead as if Trump didn't exist. His training had prepared him for exactly this type of test, though he had never imagined it would come from a visiting head of state. Every instinct told him to remain motionless, to honor his duty and his country. Trump waited several seconds, then spoke again, his voice rising. "I said, acknowledge me, soldier. That's a direct order from the President of the United States." Still nothing. The young man might as well have been carved from stone. The Queen decided she had to intervene before the situation escalated further. "Mr. President, perhaps we should continue our tour. I believe you'll find the Tudor gardens quite remarkable." But Trump wasn't finished. His face had reddened with embarrassment and anger, and he took another step closer to the guard. "This is unacceptable behavior toward an ally and a guest of your queen. I demand that these guards show proper respect." For the first time since the confrontation began, the queen's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. Her voice carried a subtle but unmistakable firmness when she replied, "Mr. President, these guards show the highest respect by performing their duties, exactly as they have been trained. They serve the crown and the people of Britain with absolute dedication." Trump spun around to face her, his eyes flashing with anger. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, I think it's time we discussed changing these outdated protocols. In the modern world, certain courtesies should be extended to visiting heads of state." The Queen's chin lifted almost imperceptibly, a gesture that anyone familiar with royal protocol would recognize as a warning sign. "Mr. President, these are not merely protocols. They are traditions that have protected British sovereignty for centuries. I'm afraid they are not subject to negotiation." The confrontation had reached a critical point. Palace staff watched nervously, unsure how their queen would handle such an unprecedented challenge to British customs from a visiting leader. The guard remained motionless, but everyone could sense the tension radiating from the scene. The tension in the palace garden was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Trump stood facing the Queen, both leaders locked in a diplomatic standoff that neither had anticipated when the day began. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still hung overhead, matching the mood of the moment. Trump's frustration had been building for over 24 hours, and now it exploded into full view. He gestured angrily toward the motionless guard, his voice rising with each word. "Your Majesty, I came here in good faith as an ally and friend of Britain, but I'm being treated with disrespect by your military personnel. This guard has directly disobeyed orders from the President of the United States." The Queen's decades of diplomatic experience had prepared her for many difficult situations, but this was truly unprecedented. Never before had a visiting head of state demanded that her guards abandon their sacred duties. She chose her words very carefully. "Mr. President, our guards serve Britain and the Crown. They follow British military protocol, not foreign orders. This has been our way for hundreds of years, long before America even existed as a nation." The subtle reminder of Britain's longer history struck Trump like a physical blow. His face flushed even redder, and he stepped closer to the Queen, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his earlier shouting. "Your Majesty, I think you're forgetting that America is your closest ally. We've saved Britain twice in world wars. We deserve better treatment than this." Several palace staff members exchanged worried glances. They had never seen anyone speak to their monarch in such a tone, let alone threaten her with historical grievances. The Queen's personal protection officers shifted almost imperceptibly, ready to act if the situation escalated further. But the Queen herself remained completely calm. She had dealt with dictators, revolutionaries, and every type of difficult personality imaginable during her long reign. She had learned that showing weakness only encouraged further aggression. "Mr. President," she said, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of royal tradition, "I suggest you remember where you are and whom you are addressing." The rebuke was delivered so quietly and with such dignity that it took a moment for Trump to fully process what had happened. He had just been put in his place by a 90-year-old woman who stood barely 5 feet tall, but instead of backing down, Trump's ego drove him to make an even more outrageous demand. He pointed directly at the motionless guard and declared loudly enough for everyone in the garden to hear, "I want that guard removed from duty immediately. If he can't show proper respect to visiting dignitaries, he shouldn't be representing Britain in an official capacity." The garden fell into absolute silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Palace staff stood frozen, unsure whether they had actually heard the President of the United States demand the dismissal of a British soldier for doing his job correctly. The Queen's expression didn't change. but those who knew her well could see something dangerous flickering in her eyes. She had protected her people and her nation's honor against far more serious threats than one petulant foreign leader. "Mr. President," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of royal authority, "you are a guest in my country. You will not dictate how my military personnel perform their duties, and you certainly will not demand the dismissal of soldiers who are serving with distinction." Trump realized he had pushed too far, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Instead, he doubled down with a threat that shocked everyone present. "Your Majesty, if these guards continue to show disrespect to the American president, I'll have to consider cutting this state visit short. I won't tolerate this kind of treatment from any ally." The Queen's response was swift and decisive. She turned to her private secretary, who had been watching the confrontation with growing alarm, and spoke in a voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "Please inform Captain Mitchell that I would like to speak with him immediately. It appears we need to address some misunderstandings about British military protocol." Trump assumed this meant the Queen was finally going to discipline her guards. A satisfied smile crossed his face as he straightened his tie, already imagining how he would describe this victory to the media later. But the Queen wasn't finished. She turned back to Trump with a look that could have frozen the Thames River. "Mr. President, while we wait for the captain, perhaps you would like to explain to me exactly what kind of respect you believe you are entitled to that goes beyond the honor of being received as a guest by the British Crown?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Trump had started this confrontation expecting easy victory over some ceremonial soldiers, but now he found himself facing the full authority of the British monarchy. The Queen was giving him one last chance to back down gracefully, but his expression suggested he still didn't understand the dangerous ground he was walking on. Captain Mitchell was already making his way across the garden, having been alerted by radio about the developing situation. He had served his country in combat zones around the world, but he had never faced a challenge quite like this one. Captain James Mitchell approached the group with the measured stride of a professional soldier who had been called to handle a crisis. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from years of military service, and the weight of responsibility that comes with protecting the crown. He had heard every word of the confrontation through his radio earpiece, and his jaw was set with barely controlled anger. Not at his soldier, who had performed flawlessly under unprecedented pressure, but at the foreign dignitary who had tried to undermine British military discipline. The Queen nodded to him as he approached, her expression conveying both support and expectation. "Captain Mitchell, the President has expressed some concerns about our guards' protocols. I thought you might be able to clarify matters." Trump stepped forward immediately, assuming he now had a military officer who would be more reasonable than the Queen. After all, military men understood chain of command and the importance of showing respect to superior officers. "Captain, I've been trying to explain to Her Majesty that your guards need better training in diplomatic courtesy. When the President of the United States addresses one of your soldiers, he should respond appropriately." Captain Mitchell looked at Trump with the same steady gaze he had used to stare down enemy commanders in Afghanistan. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned his rank through blood, sweat, and dedication. "Mr. President, my guards have received the finest training in the world. The soldier you addressed today has performed his duties exactly as he was taught, exactly as his predecessors have done for centuries, and exactly as his Queen expects." Trump's confidence faltered slightly. He had expected military deference, but Mitchell's tone was respectfully firm rather than submissive. Still, Trump pressed forward with his demands. "Captain, surely you can see that diplomatic situations require flexibility. Your guard ignored a direct order from a head of state." Mitchell's expression didn't change, but his next words cut through the garden air like a sword stroke. "Sir, with respect, you are not his head of state. You are not his commander. You have no authority over British soldiers, and your orders carry no weight within the sovereign territory of the United Kingdom." The directness of the response stunned Trump into momentary silence. He was used to people dancing around his authority with careful diplomatic language, but this British officer had just told him plainly that his presidential power meant nothing here. Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Furthermore, sir, that soldier you addressed is Guardsman Thomas Harrison. He has served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he saved 3 civilian lives under enemy fire. He earned the Military Cross for valor, and he has never once failed in his duty to crown and country. The Queen's face showed a flicker of pride at hearing her soldier defended so eloquently. She had chosen Mitchell to lead her personal guard precisely because he understood that protecting the monarchy meant protecting the principles and traditions that made it worthy of protection. Trump tried to regain control of the situation. That's all very impressive, Captain. But this is about showing proper respect to allies. America and Britain have a special relationship. Mitchell nodded slowly. Indeed we do, sir. And part of that relationship is built on mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and traditions. Just as American soldiers would not take orders from foreign leaders on American soil, British soldiers do not abandon their posts or protocols on the word of any foreign dignitary, no matter how distinguished. The captain took a step closer, to Trump, his voice dropping to a level that somehow commanded even greater attention than shouting would have. Sir, when you demanded that my soldier acknowledge you, you were asking him to betray everything he has sworn to protect. You were asking him to abandon his post, disobey his orders, and violate the trust placed in him by his queen and his country. Trump's face showed a mixture of anger and growing realization that this conversation was not going as he had planned, but Mitchell wasn't finished. Guardsman Harrison could have been facing enemy fire, a terrorist attack, or a natural disaster, and his response would have been exactly the same. That's what makes him and every member of the Queen's Guard worthy of their position. They cannot be moved, they cannot be distracted, and they cannot be bought or intimidated by anyone. The Queen watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. Mitchell was articulating exactly what she had wanted to say, but couldn't express so, directly due to diplomatic protocols. Her captain was doing more than defending his soldier. He was defending the very concept of duty and honor that made the monarchy meaningful. Mitchell's voice rose slightly as he delivered his final point. Mr. President, you have been afforded every honor and courtesy that Britain can offer. You have been welcomed by the Queen herself, housed in the finest accommodations, and treated with the respect due to your office. But you have not been given authority over British subjects, and you never will be. The garden remained silent as the weight of Mitchell's words settled over everyone present. Trump stood there, realizing for perhaps the first time that his presidential authority had clear boundaries, and he had just crashed into one of them at full speed. The silence following Captain Mitchell's speech stretched for what felt like an eternity. Trump stood in the palace garden, surrounded by British officials and his own diplomatic staff, realizing that he had just suffered a complete defeat in front of an international audience. His first instinct was to lash out, to escalate the confrontation and reassert his dominance. But something in the Queen's steady gaze and Mitchell's unwavering posture told him that any further aggression would only make his humiliation complete. He was trapped between his wounded pride and the dawning realization that he had badly miscalculated the situation. The Queen, with the diplomatic skill honed over decades of dealing with difficult world leaders, decided to offer Trump a graceful way out of the corner he had backed himself into. Captain Mitchell, thank you for that illuminating explanation of our protocols. I believe our guest now has a clearer understanding of our traditions. She turned to Trump with a smile that was polite, but carried an unmistakable firmness. Mr. President, shall we continue our tour? I believe you'll find the staterooms quite remarkable. Trump's jaw worked silently for several seconds as he struggled with his options. Every instinct screamed at him to continue fighting, to demand satisfaction, to assert his authority. But the cold reality of his situation was finally sinking in. He was a guest in a foreign country, surrounded by their people, completely dependent on their hospitality. Moreover, the media attention he had craved was now working against him. British photographers and journalists had witnessed his public humiliation, and the story would be impossible to contain or spin in his favor. The president who had demanded respect from British soldiers was the same president who had been firmly put in his place by a 90-year-old queen and a military captain. "Of course, Your Majesty," Trump finally managed, his voice much quieter than it had been during his earlier outbursts. "I apologize for any misunderstandings about your protocols." It wasn't exactly an admission of defeat, but everyone present recognized it as the closest thing to surrender they were likely to get from Donald Trump. The Queen nodded graciously, as if accepting an apology for a minor breach of etiquette rather than acknowledging a complete diplomatic victory. As the tour group began to move toward the palace, Trump caught sight of Guardsman Harrison, still, standing at perfect attention despite everything that had transpired around him. For just a moment, Trump felt something that might have been respect for the young soldier's unwavering dedication to duty. The rest of the state visit proceeded smoothly, at least on the surface. Trump participated in the scheduled events, posed for the required photographs, and made the expected diplomatic statements. But everyone involved knew that the dynamic had fundamentally changed. The Queen had demonstrated that there were limits to what Britain would tolerate, even from its most important ally. In the days following Trump's return to America, the story of his confrontation with the Royal Guard spread through British media and then around the world. The narrative that emerged wasn't the one Trump had hoped for when he first decided to challenge the Guard's protocol. Instead of being seen as a strong leader demanding proper respect, Trump was portrayed as a petulant visitor who had been schooled in dignity and duty by the very people he had tried to intimidate. Social media buzzed with praise for Guardsman Harrison's steadfast professionalism and Captain Mitchell's eloquent defense of British sovereignty. The Queen, meanwhile, received widespread acclaim for her handling of the crisis. Editorial writers praised her combination of diplomatic grace and firm resolve, noting how she had managed to defend British traditions without creating a lasting rupture in Anglo-American relations. Captain Mitchell found himself something of a celebrity, though he deflected all praise to his soldiers and the institution they served. In interviews, he consistently emphasized that the confrontation had never been personal. It had been about principles that were larger than any individual personality or political office. Guardsman Harrison, true to form, never spoke publicly about the incident. When approached by journalists, he simply stated that he had been doing his job as trained and saw no reason to discuss it further. His quiet dignity in the aftermath only enhanced his reputation and that of the Queen's Guard as a whole. The incident became a defining moment in Trump's presidency, illustrating the limits of American power and the importance of respecting other nations' sovereignty. It also served as a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in demanding respect, but in earning it through consistent, principled behavior. For the Queen's Guard, the confrontation became part of their proud history, another example of their unwavering commitment to duty in the face of any challenge. The story was told to new recruits as an example of how proper training and dedication to principle could triumph over even the most intimidating pressure. Years later, when historians examined the relationship between Britain and America during the Trump era, the Royal Guard incident would be remembered as a moment when traditional values of duty and respect proved stronger than political bluster and demands for deference. It was a reminder that some things, honor, tradition, and national dignity, cannot be commanded or demanded, only earned through consistent, principled action.